Hey, greetings and welcome back again. This week, our focus takes us a little farther east. Turning your textbooks to page 190 and 191, and you'll see the geographical map of East Asia. And this is the colored part of that map. Before we begin, I would like for you to either write out what you know about the region or at least think about that. If we were in a one of my live classes, I would have you pull out a piece of paper or something and write some things down. Write some things out or think about what you know, and then write out or think about what you would like to learn, about this region. And finally, when we're done with the lecture, you can go back over that and um, write about what you did learn. Okay, see how that works for you. So perhaps you'll need to pause if you're interested in doing that. I think it would be helpful. Pause the video to do that. All right, now you're back. This has been an area of the world that gets the attention of Americans, right? The at least the political apparatus and the American press, for sure, right? Primarily because of China and North Korea. Back in the 70s and 80s, it was probably Japan. Right? Japan was a second leading economy in the world, and we were having yeah, invasion over here of a lot of small Japanese cars due to the gas shortages and trying to save on fuel. Back in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, and we were leaving the big gas-eating cars, comfort cars like the Impalas and the station wagons, the smaller cars. But we're kind of forced to do it because of the smaller Japanese cars. So there was a lot of tension with Americans toward the Japanese in those regards back then. But things have changed, and we'll talk about that. Who the economic giants are, and you could probably predict that, right? So take a look at this particular section here, and we're going to take a look at some of the big heads up terms here in this section here. We're going to take a look at the Asian way. The Asian way is basically an adherence toward positions, whether it be age, you know, father-son relationship, employer-employee, right? There's a sense of respect for one's station in life, the Asian way. Confucius, we'll look at that, the teachings of Confucius. The kind of concern with human achievement, not really big on abstractions. Taoism, Tao is concerned with the universe. The goal there with Taoism and Tao is a balance between humans and the principle of the universe. Shinto, the national religion of Japan. The Gaijin complex. We talk an awful lot about racism in this country, right? Everything's racist this, racist that. You could make the case, and I'll get to this. Obviously, I'll dwell on this a little bit. You can make the case if you do have one of those types of societies, it may be in Japan, right? The Gaijin complex, the open door policy. The open door policy was where the Chinese opened up their markets, right? Mao Zedong, a ruthless dictator, died in 1976. His successor, Deng Xiaoping, opened up the economy late 70s, early 80s, right, to paving the way to the so-called economic giant that is today or is becoming. The Opium Wars. We'll talk about how the Europeans kind of run into a little bit of a brick wall when they run into resistance when they look to colonize this part of the globe. And so the Opium Wars, um, as the British are trading with the Chinese, I look to trade with them. Um, they're looking to getting Chinese officials at ports to dip into opium, right? Dip into opium, and that would affect well, the Chinese. That's what I'm looking for here. Make things easier, pave the way for the British to be able to get in to the ports easier. The Great Leap Forward. Oh, the Great Leap Forward was probably a great leap backward, right? It was a way for Mao Zedong, getting back to Mao, Chairman Mao, to feed the country and bring it into the industrial age. Turns out to be a disaster. The Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976. Mao, his sister, and um, some close confidants began to just take out suspected opposition to the tune of thousands, right? So between the Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution, you're losing a generation of people, right? Talk about mismanagement. We'll dwell on that a little bit more. Mao Zedong, mentioned him already a couple times, right? He leads the Communist Revolution in 1949, dies in 1976. Household responsibility system, that again begins um, under Mao's successor, Deng Xiaoping, basically adding some vestiges of capitalism and free markets into the agrarian system. And people could keep a little bit more of um, what they were growing instead of giving it all to the state, right? Sell it, try to make some profits, and the household responsibility system, right? Families kind of making decisions too on what crops to grow. Okay, and then the Three Gorges Dam. I'll dwell on that a little bit. A dam that went up last decade, was many years in the works, and it produces like 11% of uh, China, big country, 11% of their energy. So let's take a look at Chapter 5, East Asia, and the page, I guess I turn to page 191. East Asia is home to nearly 1/4 of the world's population and produces 1/5 of the world's economic output. Beginning with Japan in the 1960s, the region has experienced significant economic growth, and by the early 2000s, East Asia had become a major force in the global economy. The cultures of the Chinese, Koreans, and Japanese have many similarities, due in part with the long history of interaction by the Chinese with surrounding territories. Buddhism arrived in China from India and added spiritual and systematic frameworks to Confucian and Taoist philosophies. Buddhism, trying to think of a way to explain that if you don't know about it. Buddhism it avoids doctrines. It avoids doctrines and theories by coming into contact with truth via meditation. Okay, figure 57198. I have that down, and let me just bear with me a second here. I'm trying to why I have that there. Usually it's a temple. Yeah, it's a Buddhist temple. That's what I wanted to see there, Buddhist temple. Usually I know why I write these things, but forgetting that one. So, yeah, Buddhism also entered Japan, and it's practiced along with the national religion Shinto. Chinese civilization emerged over 4,000 years ago and was marked by periods of dynastic rule that lasted until the 20th century. Outside of China, kingdoms emerged both in Japan and Korea, although the Korean peninsula was under the control of both the Chinese and the Japanese during its history. Attempts at European colonization began in the 1500s, though never fully successful at establishing colonial occupation. The European powers were able to exert considerable influence, particularly in China, right? Certainly during the time of the Opium Wars. All right, looking at your notes. All right, looking at your notes. We start off with a lot of white space there. And I'll talk about first the Chinese empires, right? Chinese empires as a heading. And first bullet point there is the Asian way. The Asian way, colon, kind of a hierarchy of relationships on how folks work and how they live, okay? And the first bullet point under that would be ruler, right? Ruler dash subject, or boss employer. Boss employer. Second bullet point be father and son. Father and son. And third bullet point there, older and younger. Older and younger. So basically here, what you have is a shared common culture, right? Shared common culture among the region. Next, I'm going to talk about under this foundations of Chinese cultures. Foundations of Chinese cultures. Confucius. Confucius called for professional administrators to focus on conducting orderly conduct and proper behavior throughout society in all societal contexts. His principles led to government appointments through multi-based written exams. Right? You want to have efficient people in government, you test them. Under foundations of Chinese culture, talk about Taoism. Taoism disdained Confucianism. Several points here, 4 points I'd like to talk about with Taoism. Taoism advocated local control. It was based off the yin and yang. The yin and the yang, right? Y-I-N, and the yang, Y-A-N-G. And we talk about the yin and the yang, right? We're talking about opposites. Here you might want to turn to page 200 in your textbook. That is a picture there of some opposites in architecture. Opposites in architecture in the figure 510. More on that in a few minutes. So you can keep that open on page 200. Third point under Taoism, this whole thing of basing everything off the opposite, it's kind of a balance of opposites, is seen as two breaths, or as the Chinese would say, the qi, spelled GI, right? Seen as two breaths, this balance. And that's the fourth point. Everyone's purpose in Taoism is to expand to qi, obtaining balance. And in the architecture there, you could see the point and the point of the tower, the point in the tower, and the opposite of the rest of the tower. Certainly, as you start to descend the tower, the opposites in the shape. In fact, let's take a look at you can just read the caption there. The Pudong area across the Huangpu from central Shanghai. Some believe that the TV tower, completed in 1998, is too much male yang, and that the later buildings around it are more rounded and modest, female yin, to give balance. Right, so there you have that through architecture. So just kind of in recapping that section, and you could stop the video here at this point. If this would help, what's the Asian way? Ask yourself, what's the Asian way? What are the foundations of Chinese cultures? And how, if you can compare it with the American way too, right? The Asian way. How's that different from the American way? Are we respectful, to ruler subject here? Father, son, older, younger. Are we respectful? And just as a side note, I was talking to my son who's out at Robert Morris. I really think that your generation gets a bad rap. Personally, I always have had a lot of respect from younger generations as a teacher. Really have. I haven't seen many problems there. I know there's probably a lot of adults my age who would disagree with me, but I think you guys do fine. And so you can take a look at that and apply that on your own. I want to get into Japanese isolationism. Japanese isolationism. And we have some fill in the blanks here. Your first blank, Shinto. Shinto is the national religion based on animism. And the belief there is that all things have souls. All things have souls. And ancient myths and customs. So national religion based on animism and ancient myths and customs. It's a pantheistic religion. It's a pantheistic religion which involves emperor worship and Japanese superiority. So in the Japanese mind, God and creation are the same in nature. Revering what exists is akin to worshiping God. And the Japanese religion, therefore, looked at God as, emperor and tied into Japanese culture. A problem came for the Japanese, and it led, I think, to a national breakdown over there. And I'm off the fills now, just kind of an FYI. There was kind of a national nervous breakdown after World War II, because think about World War II. How did the Japanese do in World War II? They lost, right? So there was a kind of a national navel gazing there at what happened. Not only did we lose, but we lost to these white foreigners, which leads to my next point. Japanese superiority can be seen in the Gaijin complex. And the Gaijin complex is xenophobia and an arrogance of Japanese culture over all other cultures. Foreigners are not respected. In fact, and I'll dwell on this a little bit more too. Japanese aggression has been meted out on the Koreans, certainly the Chinese. The Chinese basically today hate the Japanese because of Japanese aggression. Why were the Japanese aggressive? Because their religion, their religious philosophy. They thought they could. Okay, so the Gaijin complex, foreigners are not respected. And another interesting FYI, if you will, um, if you go to Japan, children are not as diplomatic as adults. And if you're a white foreigner, you're probably black foreigner too. But if you're not Asian, children are known to, you know, young children are known to point that out. They'd be like, they see a white foreigner, Gaijin, Gaijin. And of course, that embarrasses a very, a diplomatic Asian parent, very courteous Asian parent, and they will, tamp down on that behavior. You stop that. But you're liable to hear that over there. And another thing too, when you visit other cultures, there's an offense generally if you're not adhering to their culture, right? If like an American, you're the ugly American, right? If you don't try to fit in Japanese culture because of the Gaijin complex, you go wearing Japanese garb and trying to act Japanese. Many Japanese will be offended at that. They think you are not Japanese, you're Gaijin. So be less offense of acting American, right? They'll just think, hey, it's who they are, and nothing we can do to help that, right? You get the picture. The Gaijin complex, and I said at the top of all this, we're really into this, what's racist, and if you want to take a look at, maybe a racist society, and I don't mean to be mean or condescending here, but maybe the Japanese society. I said it. Figure 220 in your textbooks. Figure 220 in your textbooks. Figure 523. Right, keep this out here. Figure 220 has an inset map there of the map of Japan that you can take a look at. Take a brief look at Korean origins. You can turn to page 225 and an inset map of the Koreas, north and south. I think that's a picture there, yes, of the demilitarized zone, right? The infamous demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. But this was annexed by the Japanese too in 1910, right? A little bit more information there on Japanese aggression. Next point there, another fill in the blank section, responses to European intrusions, right? Beginnings of 1500s, the Portuguese led European expeditions to the region. Chinese resist colonization. Demand for Chinese tea, right? The demand for Chinese tea that comes through the British East India Company. And it's traded with opium. At the southern port of Guangzhou. And on page 205, I might have to show you this as a visual. Well, maybe not. Guangzhou, if you look at your map on page 205, you can see Hong Kong. Just to the northwest of Hong Kong is the port of Guangzhou. So and this is back during the days of Chinese dynasties. The Qin government, the Qin dynasty, They forbade any kind of opium trade. So this starts the Opium Wars of 1841 and 1842. And it's kind of a side note here regarding that. The Chinese government confiscated British opium, which led to the murder of a Chinese official by British and American soldiers. So the war was confined to the Canton and East Chinese coast, um, far north as Tianjin. The British threatened Nanjing, an important port, and so the Qin dynasty at that juncture ended up suing for peace. Back to Japanese aggression here. Japanese aggression during the late 1880s, the Japanese built a really sound military to counter any Western aggression, right? And they began to modernize for economic stability, which leads to trade, although they were trading mediocre goods. They democratized in the 1900s. They made an internal pact. There was an internal pact between the Japanese military and the Japanese elite, and that was the Zubatsu family, who owned, all of Japanese big industry, and this combats against Japanese goods. Also leads to World War II. It also leads to World War II. The We had a little trade war with the Japanese during that time, leading up to World War II, well, which plays into it, and some disagreements over that. And then the Japanese invade China in 1937. The Manchuria area, we want the Japanese out of China, and so next thing you know, Pearl Harbor is getting bombed, right? So Japanese invade China. Again, they see themselves as I don't mean to be rude about this, but they kind of see themselves, because the Gaijin complex, as the superior race. So just kind of recapping that section, some questions you can ask yourself and answer before you move on to describe the Japanese way of living. What is the Gaijin complex? What causes this? Now, is this racist? Is this racist? So with over, I think I'll talk about the climate. Let me just talk about the climate here real briefly. We're not going to dwell on this, but just for your information. And I'm thinking here, just some visuals here. Page 190, 194, right? Some climate regions there, and page 195, talk about some of the geographic plates that cause problems for that region with earthquakes. But the East Asia's physical environment is very diverse. You have humid climates that range from, cool mid-latitude in the north to subtropical and tropical in the south. Mongolia on this map is where it says, probably right here, DW. This area here, Mongolia. Here's Russia up here, and then here's the region we're studying, of course. There's Mongolia. Mongolia and Western China are dominated by arid and semi-arid climates. The region has a substantial and diverse natural resource base. Much of the region is mountainous, with most of the larger lowlands concentrated in eastern China. High mountains and plateaus dominate western China. and serve as a headwaters for many rivers. Uh, Annual flooding of these rivers is a significant problem, and some human activities have made the problems worse. And then Japan, you can see the island of Japan, um, again, lies along an active plate boundary and is seismically very active. Major earthquake there within the last few years. So, in spite of not being along a plate boundary, um, northern China is also seismically active as well, and has been subject to a lot of devastating earthquakes. And you can see figure 5.5, the East Asia plate markets or plate margins there. Okay, you can see why they would have some problems in that area. Now I want to start talking about globalization in East Asia. With over 1.5 billion people, East Asia is the world's most populous region. Rates of natural increase have declined, dramatically since the 1970s, but the region will see continued population growth for the foreseeable future. The ruggedness of the landscape has resulted in population densities that are some of the highest in the world. Japan is approximately 80% urban, and the Tokyo urbanized area is the largest urban center in the world. China has undergone two distinct periods of urbanization since World War II. The first occurred in the 1950s after Mao's communist revolution, right? And that was precipitated by communist-led industrialization. More recently, economic reforms and China's increasing strength in the global economy has led to substantial urban growth. The urban population rising from just 13% in the late 70s, like 1978, to it was 41% in 2001, and I think it's up to close 55% now today. So, so the economies of Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea growing substantially during the last half of the 20th century. All right, got some notes here. Globalization and East Asia. China's entry into the global economy from 1978 to 2000. China's had the highest rate of sustained economic growth. And see what I want you guys to turn to here. Yeah, pages 209 and 210 as well. There's some demographic transition models there on page 209. And then you have the the age sex diagrams or population pyramids on page 210 that you can look at. And I just told you about from 1978 to 2000, China has the highest rate of sustained economic growth. And I have four little bullet points behind that or underneath that. The open door policy lifted 600 million people out of poverty. And the open door policy was just opening up China to the outside world. I'm taking it out of extreme rigid forms of communism. Foreign investment is now near the highest in the world. Most of the investment is coming from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Japan in the region. Right, Hong Kong, was a British protectorate from 1897 to 1997. It was handed back over to the Chinese. The Chinese Communist government looking to kind of tighten the screws on China politically, economically, and the Chinese are the citizens of Hong Kong, right? The protests in the last couple of years have been notorious. In fact, you guys are doing a paper on the Economic Freedom Index, and ever since the Economic Freedom Index has been kept, the freest area of the world is Hong Kong. However, with all of the regions of the world, um, the freedom scores have gotten lower all over the globe, even Hong Kong, which is probably doesn't come as a surprise to most in the West. It was a fear of many of us that when the British handed that back over to the Chinese promised to leave it alone, but the government is communist, and you know, they think that's what's best, right? They think that's what's best, and they've been kind of incrementally moving in on Hong Kong. But there are positive views on American companies in that part of the world, especially China. McDonald's, Starbucks, KFC were all left alone throughout the June 1989 um, democracy um, crisis in Tiananmen Square and the embassy bombings or the embassy stonings a few years back in Iraq during the Iraq War. The American military accidentally bombed a Chinese embassy in Baghdad, and folks were, in Beijing were outraged, and they were just stoning the American embassy. But all around that area, you have a lot of American businesses, the ones I just mentioned, and they were left alone. They were left alone, and they're liked, right? They're liked, and a lot of things the Americans offer are liked all around the globe. We're not as hated. We probably talked about this earlier in the course. Not as hated as maybe we're led to believe. So just kind of moving on from that section, a couple of recap questions there. What economic system is bringing China into the modern world? Figure 512 on page 203. Yes, there is that chart I like so much, right? How many folks in China, Japan, and South Korea own cars that have 1,000 people, right? And phones and cell phones and laptops. And so another thing for you guys to check out. Let's take a look at Japan. Japan is relatively small, densely populated, homogenous island country. Homogenous is a $64 way of saying everyone's the same, right? Following World War II, Japan embarked on a dramatic economic transformation, which resulted in its growing into, at the time, the world's second wealthiest economy. That's been leapfrogged by the Chinese, right? But most of the population and economic wealth is concentrated on the island of Honshu. You turn to page 220. Concentrated on the island of Honshu. And in particular, the cities of Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka, right? So, just looking at the fills here, or the notes, compared to the U.S., Japan's gross national income, gross GNI, in 1960 was 1/8 of that of the United States. By 1990, it was 53% of the U.S. It has since slowed with increased government regulation. The Japanese have kind of gone in the opposite direction in the 90s, 2000s, up to the present time period, with emperors and premiers that have been, kind of regulation happy. And this isn't my opinion. This is just cause and effect with economics. More regulation, economies slow down. Economic development. Economic development, and under economic development, our three subpoints here. The primary sector. And with the primary sector, we're talking about working with your hands, right? Raising, things right from the earth, farming, fishing, mining. Well, the primary sector was about 1% of the Japanese economy, and then it was 33% after World War II. So before World War II, 1%, 33% after World War II. Manufacturing sector, 21%. 21%. Your service sector, right? Your white collar jobs, your service sector, 68%. 68%. Now, agriculture in Japan depends a lot on large government subsidies. Depends on large government subsidies. Migration from the farm to the city has made for better jobs. Education has given the Japanese farmer new challenges. And then manufacturers, reconstruction, the Japanese recovery after World War II, right? We bombed it, U.S. bombed it, and as we've been known to do, we bomb things, and then we, bring it back to the modern age. Actually, the Americans have bombed things and then reconstructed it better than it was right before it was bombed. I knew we would do that with Iraq. Iraq probably has better drinking water now than they did before the Iraqi war, but the Japanese recovery in the 1980s was due to three areas, right? American aid, contracts during the Korean War. We were building bases and airports, right? And this is big. This is big and this is why I think we still have a lot of bases in a lot of places where we probably don't need to have them. When you don't have to invest in the military, you can save a lot of money. So we had our military, of course, in Japan, especially when Mao Zedong led the communist revolution in nearby China. We kept the military in Japan. But after World War II, a few years before Mao's communist revolution in 1949, we kept it there to rebuild the Japanese economy in our own image. So you have those three areas there that manufacturers, reconstruction. The Ministry of International Trade and Industry, or MITI, MITI, encouraged export sales by advising and assisting industry through a worldwide network of market intelligence gathering offices. So you have these timely innovations, such as building large oil tankers for a cheap way of transporting oil through global choke points, like the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal. We looked at those a few chapters back. And then you have your manufacturers, global investments. Japan made major changes to industry in the 1980s. There are more investments sought overseas. And then with those investments, they established Japanese firms overseas. You had major booms in domestic retailing during the same time period. turn to page 193, figure 5.3, and there's an interesting visual there. East Asia, an increasing proportion of the world GDP, and yeah, purchasing power parity index, and goes up to 2005. You can check that out. You have compared to the United States, China, Japan, South Korea, and then Mongolia. I'm surprised they don't have the South Korea there. So when you're done with that, you can turn to page 225. And again, inset map of the Koreas. North and South Korea, I'm going to get into, as we start to wind this up here, starting to break down China. But as I get there, I want to talk a little bit about North and South Korea. They share a common ethnicity, and until the end of the 1950s, a common history. The conclusion of World War II saw the Korean Peninsula split along the, you can see it there, figure 525, the 30th parallel. The North, supported by the Soviet Union, adopted a rigid form of communism, and the South, supported by the United States, adopted democracy and capitalism. After the Korean War in 1953, in conjunction with the United States economic aid and developmental support, South Korea became self-sufficient in food production, and its economy and infrastructure quickly developed South Korea products, and they were producing iron, steel, chemicals, automobiles, and it's increasingly entering high-tech industries. Since its inception, North Korea has experienced economic stagnation, recurring famine. Currently, this country is highly dependent on foreign aid, quite deprived, and announced in 2005 that it has nuclear weapons, right? And what they do with those nuclear weapons is occasionally they will lob one, maybe over Japan, our allies now. And it's kind of designed to blackmail the world, the international community, into supporting it, right, with foodstuffs to feed the starving country, certainly feed the military, right? Kim Jong-un and his dad and the other, they've all needed a happy military, right? So you want to feed them. So our current president kind of put a stop to that. He even went over there in 2017 after some name calling with Kim Jong-un. Remember the name Rocket Man? But the president threatened North Koreans that they needed to stop that stuff or they would suffer the consequences. And so far, that region has been experiencing peace in that regard. President Trump did go over, first U.S. president to go over to North Korea and actually step into, we met at Kim Jong-un and President Trump met at the demilitarized zone, and Kim Jong-un invited the president to take a few steps over into North Korea. The president has offered to, I think he's looked to help to graft the North Koreans into the world economy and perhaps get Kim Jong-un into maybe help, working with him, setting up casinos and whatnot over into North Korea. Some people have felt that the president deserves the at least a nomination to the Nobel Peace Prize because of that. So, the ascendancy of communism in China resulted in rapid and widespread changes. The economy and society were transformed by the collectivization of agriculture. We saw that with the Soviets. In fact, it was modeled after the Soviets. The Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, although Such movements did not necessarily improve conditions throughout China. Following the death of Mao Zedong, uh, outward-oriented economic policies spurred during dramatic economic growth in manufacturing and tertiary activities. The greatest economic growth has occurred along the Golden Coastline of eastern China. Once a British possession, Hong Kong is the world's busiest port, all right, and has served China well. So a little notes, a little section for notes here. I believe many countries nearby fear a strong China, but China is surprising as this is to us. China kind of sees itself still trying to escape um, countries of foreign domination and poverty. Sees itself trying to do that. Now, in your fills here, some of the worst mismanagement, this is putting this mildly, in I think the history of the world occurred in China. The first one was the collectivization and the communes. In 1949, China began to mold its changes on the Soviet model. Large social investment in the industry, not too much in agriculture, okay? And this leads to problems. Most of the investment went into manufacturing. Government established communes, combined agriculture, industry, trade, education, and local militia. General needs were guaranteed under the communist system, right? This leads to the Great Leap Forward, right? Great Leap Forward, and then the Cultural Revolution. The Great Leap Forward was such an emphasis on industry that it brought neglect to farming. Coupled with droughts, it brought the death total to 30 million people, right? It's a whole entire generation of people. Terrible mismanagement. You know, I can't underscore that enough under Mao. And then, I mean, just a new kind of stupid. You know, you need manpower, right, to do all these things. He, his wife, and family members, the Gang of Four, it was called, purged the educated classes, potential capitalists, and any kind of, you know, potential political leaders. So from 1966 to 76, again, countless thousands were murdered. I mean, yeah, that's just a new kind of stupid. Mao died in 1976, later that year, right? And then China joined the wider world under Deng Xiaoping. Deng, committed communist. If you know, just look at the democracy demonstrations of Tiananmen Square of June 1989, you know, taking a tank out to roll over protesters. But he does enact a household responsibility system. Families decided what crops to grow in the 1980s. Collective land could be leased up to 15 years. A contracted amount of grain would go to the government. So just some recap questions there. Whose model was copied when the Chinese became communist in 1949 under Mao? What were some comparisons and differences with the Soviet model, looking back at the last chapter? Now, wrapping this up here, economic development in China. Economic development, I think you have fill in the blanks there. Farming and rural living in the 2000s made profitable, more profitable at least, industrial crops such as cotton and soybeans, threaten the more staple crops such as wheat and rice. China's energy policy, the Three Gorges Dam, right, the largest electric generating plant in the world, produces 11% of the country's electric generation. I think that was completed, supposed to be completed in 2009, but it took about 2012, somewhere around Independence Day, if I remember right, 2012. Coal reserves remain China's chief source of energy in the northern half of the country. Then growth in Chinese manufacturing. State-owned enterprises have either merged or have been given to the workers. The remaining state-owned businesses exist primarily to compensate for the less profitable businesses. You have increasing steel output in China. The old industrial area of northeast China became the country's Rust Belt. Expansion of tertiary industries. You have Shanghai's new Pudong area, which has seen a huge expansion of financial investment with 150 foreign institutions, 20 world-scale banks, and they even have a Shanghai Stock Exchange. In fact, the area I showed you earlier with the architecture, the yin and the yang, right? That is that particular district. And then attacking poverty in China. 1980s agricultural reforms created jobs. Less than 10% of the farmers were in poverty. And then lastly, turn to page 229. We'll give Mongolia a little love here. Mongolia is a sparsely populated landlocked country. Historically, the dominant economic activities have been agriculture and herding, but mining of the country's extensive mineral wealth has increased in importance. And then Taiwan. Look at Taiwan, the south, or in the south and the east, just east of Hong Kong, Taiwan. Taiwan is a political anomaly in the region. I wanted to just touch base on this because of time. You can't cover everything, but Taiwan's important. Taiwan's a political anomaly in the region. Following the communist takeover in 1949 of mainland China, the nationalist Chinese established a separate government on the island. And although this government has ruled since 1949, the People's Republic of China on the mainland still maintain that the island is part of the mainland country. In fact, in order not to upset the Chinese, when at the UN and international forums, Taiwan is not mentioned. It's still looked at as the People's Republic of China. However, it has a capitalist economy there. It's been propped up by the United States since 1949. Does quite well, as a matter of fact. Taiwan is a progressive capitalist economy based now on high technological activities. The Chinese never really give up on their goals. They've always looked at getting Taiwan back, right? So we always have a lot of ships and defense around the island. So let's kind of recap. This lecture model is available for you visual types. We looked today at looking here at East Asia, and we were looking at where is my Asian way section there? There it is. China and the region, the Asian way, shared common cultures. In China, you have Confucian versus Taoism. Confucianism, looking at human achievement, organization, structuring government. Taoism or local control, focusing on balance, right? The yin and the yang. China entered into the global economy after Mao died in 1976. Started off with a household responsibility system, Folks decide what crops to grow. Land is leased up to 15 years. There's increases in energy, manufacturing, steel, service. Poverty has declined in China. Under Mao, just unbelievable, evil, stupidity. You had the Great Leap Forward, too much emphasis on industry, droughts lead to famines, 30 million people dying under the Great Leap Forward program, Cultural Revolution, just massive purges. Japan, right? Japan, no military, right? Saving a lot of money there. Recovery after World War II through American aid, contracts with the American military, right? Kind of making out like bandits there. Shinto, major religion, an animistic religion. It's pantheistic. God and creator are one. Emperor worship leads to, God is the emperor, right? Leads to superiority. Leads to a nervous breakdown, too. A national nervous breakdown after World War II. Where's God at? Our Japanese God allowing us not only, we didn't win, but we're used to beating people around, in our own region. We lost to these white gaijin. How could this happen, right? The gaijin complex. Japanese invade China in 1937. The U.S. puts pressure on them to get out. We end up, withholding, oil and gas to the Chinese. They, initiate a trade war with us, and then they end up attacking Pearl Harbor in 1941, right? December 7th, 1941. Europeans look to colonize the region, Portuguese in 1500s. We meet resistance there. We didn't meet so much resistance in other places, right? Africa and South America a little later on. But Opium Wars between Britain and China, 1841, 1842. And then you have Japanese aggression. Japanese see that the Europeans are looking to colonize, build up their military. The Koreans, Korea is annexed by Japan. There's a war in 1950 on the Korean Peninsula, and it gets split in two, right? The North and the South at the 38th parallel, and then Taiwan. Taiwan is a separate island now. The nationalists that were chased out of power in 1949 by the communists fled there, got their own capitalist economy, protected mightily by the United States. Chinese like to have that back. In Mongolia, right, landlocked in between Russia and China, kind of a herding community. There's coal there and some natural resources. So there is kind of a recap of that particular section. I'm going to talk about where we're heading here in the future, in the near future. And let me get my, let me see. Here I am. The resident Mount Aloysius Bob Ross. You guys remember Bob Ross, the guy with the frizzy hair and the easels, and would paint these smiling faces and, well, not faces, smiling. Maybe he didn't have smiling things on there, but he had these drawing the sun and the trees, and he'd come up with these really immaculate looking sketches. But I'm the resident Bob Ross here at Mount Aloysius, I suppose. This week, up ahead, I'm going to have 4 short videos. I'm going to try to get a video on there. One of them is kind of highlighting, and they're short videos, a couple minutes, 3 minutes. I want to highlight Japan's population problem. When you go to Japan, when you go get a hotel, you're in what they call beehive rooms, little capsules. And if you're claustrophobic, I'm sure they could drive you crazy, right? You have these little cubby holes. you have enough room to lay down in, maybe watch a small TV. Really, seriously, I'm going to try to get that a short video of one of those up for you guys. A guided practice assignment that is already posted. A practice assignment. It's a practice assignment that a lot of English people would be proud of. Having you guys practice with the themes that are going to show up on the quiz, and making analogies and using some literary devices. You'll see the instructions on that. It'll be clear. So that'll be due Wednesday, but that's up now. You can get started on that. In the news, of course, is due on Thursday. I have an FYI for you guys. FYIs are things that you don't necessarily need to get back to me, but they are, I feel, important for educational purposes. They serve as current events, and the FYI is written by a guy named Lee Smith. Lee Smith is a veteran journalist, been around a long time. I really respect him. He has, and I feel like this kind of falls outside of the realm of the goals of, my objectives for this particular chapter, but it's important enough, and it's about China. It's about China, and I had talked about how our president, whether it's good or bad, whether people are right or wrong, that's not the point. He's got a lot of opposition. And I've been saying that, and I've been telling my government face-to-face class that Trump is an outsider. He's not a part of the Washington establishment. And that's a problem for them. But this FYI here, this reading is called America's China Class Launches a New War Against Trump. It's by Lee Smith. One of the problems, an impetus to the hatred of Donald Trump is his trade wars and his nationalism against China. Trump is looking to cut, I guess you could say, some people say, the gravy train that China has had with the United States over the past, I don't know how many decades. And what Lee Smith is getting at here is you got a lot of powerful people in America benefiting from the relationship with China, okay? And he names some names in this article. So, in the grand scheme of things with China, I think this is a good thing to read. It's about 3.5 pages. I think you will find it, like I said, I think you'll find it very interesting. And again, you don't owe that to me. Or you don't owe in regard to adding that into a reading. If you want to put it in a reading, if you can find or into a discussion, if you can see room to do that, that's fine. I probably would enjoy seeing it. Unlike the videos, right? Be sure to look to fit, some of those, any of those, or all of them into your discussions. And I haven't been emphasizing this enough, but any extra readings, generally, and videos, I'd like to see those grafted into the discussions. Okay, so I think that's it for what's up ahead. Of course, we'll be you have your discussions. Will be due next Sunday, this coming Sunday night. Okay. So that kind of wraps it up from here. And you guys, again, as always, questions, comments, I am around my phone and the laptop a lot, looking to see my online groups, see how what their needs are. So, well, I suppose I will say I'll sign off now. And I'll talk to you guys next week, and you guys have a really good week. All right. Bye-bye.